I love it.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we're back together again with another episode in our Biblical Theology project. This time we're talking about Deuteronomy 14, 15, and 16. And I'm excited to have these guys here to talk about the scriptures with again. Let's go ahead and bring in Brother Micah. Micah, how are you?
I'm doing excellent, and I can tell you for 100% certain, I am way more excited about this passage than Eric is. I just want to throw that out there.
Wow. What makes you so certain?
I just know that with my level of excitement this morning, there's nothing that can top it.
All right. Well, that seems like good things are in store. Well, let's go ahead and bring in Eric. Eric, are you positive about that? I mean, do you think such a thing could it even be that someone could be more excited about this passage of scripture than you?
You know, I'm starting to sweat a little bit as Micah describes his level of excitement. I don't know that I'm going to try and compete with that. But based on what he said, it's going to be difficult.
Well, I'm having a hard time reconciling what he's saying now with what he told us beforehand. He was telling us how tired he was because of how much preaching he did, and now he's saying that he's just exuberantly excited. So I'm excited to see which version of Micah comes out.
It's just inertia at this point. It's like it never stopped from yesterday, so it's just carrying me forward at this point.
All right. Well, we're setting big expectations, and so last but certainly not least, Brother Greg, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Out of humility, I'll just allow those two brothers to battle it out, and I'll be my normal, mildly excited self.
Out of humility, I'll just say I'm just not that excited about this passage.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you, Joe?
Oh, man.
Joe doesn't get excited. Stop it.
Yeah, I feel like he's always at a 5.5.
The scale is broken. No, externally I'm always at a 5.5, but internally I'm at a 10. So that's just that's just how it goes. So well, I am glad to be here with you guys. I'm looking forward to getting to it. So without any further delay, if you're watching this episode, though, and you're not all that familiar with these chapters, we're not going to read through them on the episode. And so you might want to read every word and maybe press pause now if you haven't done so recently so that you know everything that's in there. But Brother Greg, I think you wanted to get us started this time.
I think I do, yeah. Unless I'm mistaken, and perhaps I am, it wouldn't be the first time, beginning of chapter 14 is the first time that we hear the children of Israel called the sons of God, or the sons of the Lord, the sons of Yahweh. Why here? Why now? Is there something? I feel like this is something important. We ought to at least mark this and consider it. Any special significance to how we should read this text, or special application for us that comes out of the fact that this, I think, is the first time they are called the sons of Yahweh.
So this is actually one of the reasons that I was so excited about this, is because I get to tell Greg that he's only half right.
Hey, I'm half righter than I usually am. So
I think it's true that this is the first time they're called sons individually, like plural. It's an individualistic thing. However, Exodus chapter 4, and I believe it is verse 22, then he shall say to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. And I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I'll kill your firstborn son." Okay.
I'd maintain my position is still at least 95% correct. This is the first time they individually are called sons of God versus the nation of Israel being called. So.
Right. And I think that is so I think it draws on the firstborn son thing as God's special possession. They're supposed to image him in the world. I think it's drawing on that. And I think that and this is where I think the uniqueness of this comes in. So I'm agreeing with Greg here.
But I had to be at least partially wrong.
The uniqueness of this is coming in because he's letting them know you're sons individually, not just corporately. He's emphasizing individual responsibility here, I think. An individual responsibility, as it were, to live within the family image. And then he goes through all of these different aspects of what it looks like to have that stamp of divine sonship on your life practically. It involves all of these, I would say, ceremonial things. These layers of separation that they're supposed to have from the Gentiles and the pagan nations. I think that the individual aspect of it is is really is important, because it's letting them know not only is this your responsibility to keep away from these corporate things corporately. Like, I could look at, if Joe, Greg, Eric, and I were addressed as a group, and those three were doing what they're supposed to do, and I'm just going to sort of ride on their coattails, but I'm going to be off here on the fringes, doing whatever with regard to these regulations. No, it can't be that way. And God is emphasizing that you have an individual responsibility to bear out that stamp of sonship in your individual lives, not just corporately as a nation.
At some point, I would find it interesting for you and it doesn't have to be on camera, but to talk about what you mean by ceremonial law. Because I think when I say it, I mean one thing. When you say it, as I hear you talk more and more about it, I think we might just have slightly different definitions. And so, no, I appreciate that, but we can put a pin on that. Maybe sometime come back to it. Guys, fellas.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point to Micah's. It's not much different at all, or not any different. But as you read the scriptures, even in the law, we've already seen this. Micah gave an example from Exodus 4. Israel corporately is described in several different ways. Israel is God's son. Israel is sometimes referred to as God's wife. Even Israel's also God's flock. But then, there are times where individuals are referred to, and here in this case in Deuteronomy 14, the individuals are referred to as sons. And I think all of these metaphors, they all describe God's covenant relationship with his people, or we could say his relationship with his people. Obviously, the covenant is what makes that relationship possible. So yeah, I would agree. And in the context, the Israelites were the sons of God in the sense that they were to follow and imitate him alone and not turn to any other god. That's why the verse goes on to forbid pagan practices. If they did these pagan practices, they would be acting like, children of whatever pagan god they were serving. So there's a theme in Scripture where whoever you're imitating, that's who your father is in a spiritual sense. So if actually we even get that way back in Genesis 3:15, and I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, you shall bruise him on the heel. Now, we can't get into this in any kind of great detail. This is obviously, as we've said before, this is talking about the Messiah, this is talking about the seed of the serpent. But there's the sense in which there are these two, if you will, families. And one is imitating one person, the Messiah, or God, and the other is imitating the serpent. I'll just leave it at that. So whoever you're following is essentially who your spiritual father is, and we'll see that theme repeated all throughout Scripture.
Well, that's connected even with the concept of the image of God, isn't it? I mean, sometimes I think it's probably correct to say that the image of God does have a static component and a functional component, meaning we are body and soul. There's something material and immaterial to us, and that is part of the image of God. But I think that if you go to Genesis, the first chapters of Genesis, you see that being made in the image of God is more than just the composition of man, having a physical substance and then having God breathe life into him. But it's also about the function that he was supposed to carry out. God sets his image in the garden, and this is sort of drawing on the ancient Near Eastern concept of images as well. But kings, if they wanted to represent their rule in a particular place that wasn't their immediate domain, they would put images of themselves there, and it would be sort of an extension of their rule or their representation. I think that could be connected to sonship. This concept of sonship, being a son of God means you're supposed to image God. The seed of the woman, and then the seed of the serpent. Obviously, these are people who are not imaging God. They're not sons of God. They are children of their father, the devil. So I think that it's even that same sort of theme of sonship is tied into the image of God there in the first chapters of Genesis as well.
Would you go so far as to say that, you don't think the image of God is lost in people that don't like obey him or something like that. So there is like what you were just talking about, there is still some truth to that in any human being even. Okay. Yeah, very, very interesting. I was just going to tie this to the inheritance language that we see, these various figures of speech, as Eric elucidated many of them. The sonship language in particular seems to be tied to the inheritance. We've seen this a lot in Deuteronomy already. I think it was Deuteronomy 9 when it was talking about how the people are God's inheritance. And then Deuteronomy 10 was speaking about the Levites not having an inheritance because the Lord is his inheritance. Deuteronomy 12, the land itself is the inheritance. So we've talked a lot about the land. We've talked about this inheritance. This is now that most explicit language. And Greg, I think if there is another version of this that's identical to this, I can't find it. I do think this is the first one. And this certainly will not be the predominant language. Sons of Israel will become a much more common terminology, but we are being introduced to a concept that is very important. And certainly we will want to kind of keep that going as we go from here. The last part of your question, I don't know. I don't know that it has any relevance for us, or at least that I would bring any relevance for us, other than the four of us who are discussing this, that we would keep this in mind as we continue to look through Scripture. That would be the main relevance, for me. But as far as like my other everyday life, this particular identification for me tied to the inheritance is speaking particularly of them, and I'll want to see, as this traces or as this continues, there will be some other discussions that I anticipate we'll have down the road, but I'll leave those for a future time.
So I think that there's actually something that we can learn about the relationship between identity and duty or responsibility here. We live in a world that is characterized by this sort of radical individualism, where my identity is formed by me taking how I feel and projecting that externally. Like bringing all of my internal inclinations, emotions, feelings. That's why people take their sexuality actually and pin it as like the central aspect of their identity. This is who I am because it's how I feel. The Bible gives a much different picture from that. The Bible actually says, for instance, here in this chapter, you are sons of the Lord your God. How is God defining identity? He's defining it in terms of relationships. First of all, you're a creature. That's the first pillar of your identity. Secondly, you've been adopted as a son of the Lord your God. That's another pillar of your identity. And then, how is that supposed to be lived out? How are you supposed to find meaning in your life in accordance with that identity? Well, he lists duties, right? He lists responsibilities. He lists things that you are actually supposed to do because God has created you within this framework of relationships. First of all, the vertical relationship, but then also the horizontal relationship to other image bearers of God. I think that this is an important aspect of anthropology as we study the Scriptures that's highly applicable to us today. If you sort of turn this, and it is admittedly it's looking at the passage sideways a little bit, but he tells them something about who they are, and that has implications for how they live. Their identity is not to be found internally. It's to be found externally in relationship, and then borne out in real, tangible responsibilities and duties. That's how they're supposed to find their meaning.
I like all of that, and I wouldn't disagree with any of it, I don't think. I appreciate the duties and responsibilities that you, Micah, drew on, but I also appreciate the inheritance, or maybe what I would call the blessing that comes along with being a son of God that Joe drew out. And so I'd want to take those together, that this, because this is establishing relationship, it's not just establishing expectations. I have many kids, but I have a couple sons, and as I say, you are my son. Yeah, that comes with some expectation, but hopefully, if I'm being a good father, it also comes with blessings. And so this is a two-way relationship, or it's a relationship that has both expectations and blessings. And so I think while what we see here, particularly in these verses, is the expectation, I don't think it's anything less than the expectation, but I think it's more that this relationship does have benefits.
And I definitely don't mean to divorce the blessings from that. I think actually,
and I don't hear you doing that. I just,
one of the ways that we actually find, and this is a little bit of an abstraction from the text, but I think actually one of the ways that we find a lot of blessing in our lives is by living in accordance with these, this identity, but like in terms of relationships and the duties that correspond to those relationships. Nobody is happy that just lives for themselves all the time. I mean, it's like they might be happy temporarily. They might be happy for a season, but it's just like with all temptations of the world, the flesh, and the devil. Satan holds out to you a closed fist and promises that there's blessing inside, and he opens it up, and it's a fistful of garbage. That's why there's so much despair in our world today, because we think the path to happiness and to blessing is through this, living in accordance with who I think I ought to be. No. This passage says the path to blessing is living in accordance with your identity as sons of God.
Amen.
I had a question about verse 21 of Deuteronomy 14. According to verse 21, an Israelite was not allowed to eat anything that died of itself, that is, by natural causes, but he could give it to an alien in his town or sell it to a foreigner. I find that really interesting that God told the Israelites, you're not to eat this, but yet you can give it to someone else. You can give it to an outsider, and they can eat it. You're allowed to do that. So what does this reveal about the nature of Israel's dietary laws? And Greg asked, what's the difference between a ceremonial law and other laws? There seems to be a distinction being made here in this text. So what are your guys' thoughts on this? What do you guys think?
So I actually had written in my Bible before this question was ever asked that this demonstrates that ceremonial laws are positive in nature, and within the sort of framework of the threefold distinction or threefold division of the law, one of the characteristics of ceremonial and judicial laws is that they are positive in nature, not moral in nature. And basically what that means is that, for instance, you take Adam in the garden, and I might have said this before, but you take Adam in the garden, and he has a responsibility to totally obey God. And he's made in the image of God. He's got the law of God written on his heart, I think according to later passages in Scripture. He has a responsibility to obey God. But then God gives him this command that, if God had never said that, like him eating from that tree wouldn't have been wrong. Until God said it, until God said, actually, you're going to demonstrate your obedience to me by not eating of this tree. That's a positive law. It's not something that's inherently immoral, according to the way that God made the world, or according to, it's not a transgression of the moral law. But once God says, actually, this is how you're going to demonstrate your obedience to me, through doing these other things too, well then, now, transgressing that law becomes sinful. And I think that that's demonstrated in these verses, because Israel has this special status as sons, and that comes with distinct expectations. But he says you can give it to somebody else, and they can eat it. I don't think God's giving somebody else the permission to do something that is inherently sinful or a transgression of the moral law. That's why I would take ceremonial laws as a distinct category. And of course they're related. I'm not saying they're not related, but someone else can do this without sinning, and the Israelite cannot do this without sinning. I think that's kind of a demonstration of the principle,
And this is where, again, perhaps we're working on, well, actually, not perhaps, we are working off of different definitions of what ceremonial law is. And I'm going to admit that I could be the one with the wrong definition. But maybe I misheard you, or maybe I'm not understanding your definition of what you view ceremonial law as. It sounds like you're saying almost any prescription God has given that isn't definitively moral in nature is thereby ceremonial. But then what do we do with everything you want to call civil law? Maybe you'd say anything casuistic is civil law. I'm not, and so because of my presumption that the ceremonial law governs the corporate and individual worship of Yahweh, I don't read coming across a dead animal as, and then going, hey, I'm going to eat this thing. I don't view that as regulating worship. Therefore, I don't put it in a ceremonial law. And because I don't necessarily like I use it, I'm not arguing against it. I just don't always find it helpful in every instance to go, oh, this has to fit into one of these buckets very neatly so that I can understand it properly. But I understand if we're going to create those buckets and everything has to fit within a bucket, I understand why you want to put this in that bucket. But again, I think it's a definitional problem, and that's why I think a conversation focused on why do you decide what is ceremonial based upon what you do, when this, and again, my definition says this isn't regulating ceremony. This is regulating purity of the people. And so, like, I've told you it's wrong for you to eat dead animals. Anybody else, and everybody who isn't set aside as my people, they can eat dead animals all they want. Sell it, make money off it, do whatever. Not your problem. Your problem is don't eat animals that just keel over and die of a heart attack or die of whatever natural causes come their way. And so that's where I think our disconnect is.
So I don't really care. For instance, if you wanted to put this in a different bucket, like let's say you wanted to put it in the civil bucket or some other bucket that you create, that's fine with me. I just want a distinction between the moral law of God, like do not commit adultery, compared to this. I want a distinction between those two things.
Yeah, this is definitely not a moral law.
Right, because he's giving the Gentiles permission, like... Yeah, he doesn't give the Gentiles permission to commit adultery. Like
you're almost making my point. You're almost making my point that maybe these buckets, these well-defined buckets, aren't as helpful as we think they are because it's not a moral law, and for some reason because it's not a civil law, therefore it must be ceremonial.
Well, Greg, let me ask you this: if someone touched a dead animal, would they be able to immediately worship God without doing anything?
Yeah.
Again,
temple
now
worship
you're
and
now
that kind of thing.
But here, this doesn't say you can't touch it. It says, hey man, you're allowed to go sell it. So is this regulating worship? Again, I'm taking us far afield, and I'm not meaning to at all. But
there are other passages, though. There are other texts where it says if a priest touches a dead animal, he has to go through a ceremony of cleansing. And before he can continue,
God bless you, Eric.
Practices.
I would, if we have to create buckets, I would completely agree that the law regulating how a priest has to become clean in order to worship is a ceremony. I completely agree with you.
But,
no disconnect whatsoever. Is that what this law is about?
Would you at least
seem to be?
Would you at least agree that this is not an inherently moral statute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's what's most important to me.
Yeah, no, 100%. This is about the personal setting aside of individual and corporately of the people of Israel so that they don't look like everyone around them. And this is a dietary way in which that is done. And so my argument isn't that this is a moral law. My argument is like maybe we should blend or we should blur the edges of the categories we've created or maybe just not, I don't want to get rid of them because they are helpful but the rigidity with which we use these because I don't think God's law says this is civil, this is moral. We've created these categories and they become unhelpful to us at times, I think.
Yeah, I think the point that you're making about our definitions, we've talked about this on so many different issues, and this is a very clear reason why our definitions matter. And since we don't have a place that defines this, then how we define them, it's going to influence everything else. I would think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, that you would agree that their worship of the Lord, and surely this is true of us, but I'm talking about them in particular, that their worship of the Lord isn't simply relegated to temple worship and the sacrifices, but they are to worship God with their whole of existence. Part of this identity, even as we were going back to our first question, they are sons of God, so they're called to be, to use your phrase that you just used, this set apart people. That's right here in this passage. Mm-hmm. In fact, the reason why God says that they ought not to do this, he doesn't say because this is a ceremonial law, but he says because you're a people who are holy unto the Lord. And so it's not that it's immoral for other people to eat this. I would add something that none of you guys have said, or at least if you did, I missed it, but that I've heard before, that the dietary laws are often not about anything other than health, that God was trying to give them the healthiest thing.
Yeah.
I don't think God's saying, well, they can get sick by eating this thing and keeping you.
Let them get worms and not
I
you.
think,
Yeah.
right, exactly. I think that this is, I'll put it on Micah's term in just the way that I heard it, these kind of hoop jumping laws. God wants them to jump through these hoops, not because it's inherently immoral to not jump through them, but because by them jumping through these hoops, their distinctness is more clear. And so why does God want them to do these things? Is it wrong for you to do this? Well, it's wrong for his people to do this simply because God has said, I'm set you apart not to do this, and your distinctness, I've never lived in a place where people are living off of, I've never lived in a place that didn't have grocery stores all over the place or whatever. But I talked to a missionary who, while I was talking to him on like a video call where he was, in the bush of some remote area, he got really excited because he got a call that there was like a roadkill animal that he was going to go and get. Somebody like told him it was like a big moose or something that somebody hit with a car. And he's so excited because he's like, I'm going to go get this moose and my family's going to eat this moose. And I can't relate to that. Like if somebody called me on the phone and said, hey, there's a dead moose.
You don't have any cop buddies that call you when a
I do not.
Deer gets hit or whatever?
Nope. No. I'm just not a part of that culture. So there's I can't really relate to it. And so this, this guy's excited about this. And I think that, this is a food source that if an animal has died, people go, yeah, I want to eat that. And God is saying, listen, I'm going to provide for you in other ways. You're not to do this. This is I don't know. I'm not trying to be insensitive to Micah's definition. He's using a much more theologically accurate word in these positive commands. But the hoop jumping isn't just because God, wants them to jump through hoops. That can be the negative connotation. But he wants them to jump through these so that they'll be distinct. And then now, even something like this does become an act of worship. There's something that I could eat, but I'm not going to because I'm set apart to the Lord. And so at least on his definition, it would fit maybe more cleanly than it sounds like it fits to you. I'm not saying that means his definition is correct, but as he's saying that, I guess my question to you is, do you think that the ceremonial law could include a bigger context of, okay, well, you don't touch this, you don't eat this. If you were a priest, you would have to go through some other, could this be related to worship? Even though it doesn't immediately seem like it's worship, as in like your whole life is worship, kind of a concept.
And if your whole yes, it could. And again, I think that the boundary gets defined when we say what is ceremonial law. Well, if ceremonial law is law that governs your whole life, well, then it's just the law. And so do we need the buckets as rigid as we are? I would be more comfortable if we wanted to say something like there's moral law, there's ceremonial law, there's civil law, and then there's set apartness law, sanctification law, or something like that. Maybe I haven't. This is the first time I thought about this, but I feel like we come across something and we go, oh, well, that has to fit into a bucket. And so what bucket does it best fit into? And then we ram it in this bucket. Yes, in a sense, absolutely everything you do is a reflection of your theology. How I pay my bills is a reflection of what I think about God. And so is paying my bills a ceremonial thing? Well, no, it's not. But again, how do we define ceremony? How do we define worship? What kind of bounds? Because if we're not going to put any bounds on it, suddenly then everything is worship. And again, in a sense it is, but to be useful, I feel like it has to have some bounds.
So I would say the largest bucket that the one that you called set apartness law, that's the bucket I was calling positive law. Stuff that's not necessarily inherently moral, but God attaches these stipulations, specifically oftentimes to covenants, attaches these stipulations for the sake of the set apartness and the distinction of that people. And if I draw a comparison to the new covenant, am I going to get a demerit?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, I'm
Yeah, why
okay
wouldn't
with
you?
I'm okay.
And
with
I guess my
I'll
biggest
take the
problem,
demerit.
or at least one of my concerns for not wanting to drop everything that we would otherwise try to put somewhere else into the ceremonial law is because as new covenant believers, we go, the ceremonial law isn't for us, and so let's get rid of everything. And while I suppose you can go eat an animal that just drops dead on its own, I don't think it's a great idea. But there ought to be some principle that we do maintain from that, and so there is the set apartness. And does set apartness mean we can't eat cows that have heart attacks? Shouldn't, but no, I don't. That's
why I think we should make a distinction.
They're really
of
trying
the
to save
covenant.
you from getting your demerit, Micah. They both they don't.
It's okay. The moment's passed.
Yeah, all right.
I'm helping you out, brother. I'm here for you. I am here for you.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
want to make just two quick points, and then we can move on. Unless Micah's got something to say. But this passage in Deuteronomy is not a standalone verse. In Leviticus 17, verse 15, it says, when any person eats an animal which dies, there's that same language again, or is torn by beasts, whether he's a native or an alien, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and remain unclean until evening. Then he will become clean. This is a matter of cleanness.
Is right. Like that's about whether you're doing what you're not supposed to do, eating that animal. When you want to become clean again, this, at least the way I read this text here in Deuteronomy isn't about how to become clean again so that you can come worship God. It's about whether you're
but this is a complementary verse in Leviticus. So the Leviticus, that's why I said before, the law is meant to be read as a whole. So if you have you'll have maybe 3 different passages
until you're ready to chop it up and put it in different buckets.
But you have to.
He's talking about the law in terms of the
buckets.
Pentateuch. He's talking about the Pentateuch.
I understand.
Yeah.
So they're mutually interpretive passages within the Pentateuch that reinforce.
I'm making a different point. I understand what he's saying.
Yeah, so Leviticus 17:15 sheds light on Deuteronomy 14:21. Deuteronomy 14:21 is not to be understood as a completely different, disconnected law. I think these are talking about really the same thing. Now, obviously, the context is somewhat different, but if this is maybe the larger point, and that is that I've heard people argue, and usually it's Hebrew roots people are arguing, well, just because we have the new covenant, that doesn't mean that we can just forget about all these laws. Well, we don't forget about all the laws, but they make the case. Well, because all these laws are connected, and they're really, we shouldn't be making distinctions between these laws. Therefore, we need to bring all of the law into the new covenant and act like nothing has changed. Yeah, that's a tremendous.
You're pointing out the ditch on the other side of the road, and I don't deny that.
And I'm not saying you're going that far, but I've heard people make that argument.
You are 100% correct in pointing out the ditch on the other side of the road. And I'm not trying to make too much of my ditch. Your ditch is great too. I love you have a wonderful ditch. It's a great ditch.
I love it.
Maybe it's the best. It's the most beautiful ditch ever.
It's a beautiful ditch. They tell me, look at how great this ditch is.
You should probably move on.
I said, no, there are other ditches.
Wow. Okay.
I'm good.
Well,
that got weird.
That was totally on me. I'll take ownership for it.
How about this? How about we move on?
Yeah, you should.
I get another question. In Deuteronomy 14, verses 28 and 29, there's a certain principle that's being expressed here, and this is within a larger context, but there's a certain principle that's being expressed in these 2 verses. What do you guys think of this principle? Is it even there? What are your thoughts on that?
What is the principle? You tell us.
You didn't read it, Greg?
I did.
Did you read the show sheet ahead of time?
Well, he's asking if it's even there.
He didn't read the passage.
You're acting like this is this is the first time you've stumbled upon this.
Yeah. We're having a conversation.
So Eric, I will state the way that I understand it, but I will nuance this with the fact that this is a detail that I've read through these many times, but I just never really noticed before, and I haven't really had a particular burning or passionate interest in the tithe system of the Old Testament, and so I had thought previously that the tithe every year was supposed to go to this. But this seems like the third year you're supposed to bring it out. And I don't know if you're supposed to deposit it somewhere and then bring all of it on every third year. So you're not doing it, every year, but you are still bringing every year. You're just bringing it on a 3-year basis. So how I would answer the question that you're asking, this principle, this people, the Levites, who had no inheritance in the land, couldn't work the land and produce for themselves. They needed provision. And so this is the tithing principle is something that provides for them. That's my base level answer. But what's standing out to me, and I don't know if this is the reason that you're asking the question, is that it's the end of the third year. And that part stood out to me. I used to think this was an every year thing. And for the first time, it just kind of because you asked this question, I kind of noticed this detail that I had just read over previously. And so I don't know if part of the principle is related to this third year aspect. So I have nothing to say about that. I just will note that I appreciate you asking the question because you forced me to pay attention to a detail that my eyes have glossed over many times before. So at the base level, God is giving a plan to provide for his Levites because they don't have an inheritance in the land like everybody else. So when they get into the land, make sure that these people who are involved in this very important aspect of administering the worship of Yahweh, that they are not unprovided for. They need to be provided, and this is the system to provide for them.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to be obtuse there. There have been many times where Eric asks a question, and then we get done. We spend 15 minutes answering. He goes, "Well, that's not what I meant at all." Okay,
you're right. That does happen.
It does happen. So I really wasn't.
You're not crazy.
So what? I'm just asking.
Well, if you guys would just get it right, then we wouldn't have to go through that whole process.
Because he acts like the show sheet perfectly explains this. What's the principle being expressed in verses 28 and 29? Like that's the extent of the question.
I know.
Can you please, for the sake of the less intelligent me,
Micah,
can you please clarify what principle it is you're exactly talking about?
Yeah. What Joe said. Actually, I kind of had.
You had something else in mind,
similar.
didn't you?
No, I had a similar experience as I read this verse because I had some assumptions about the tithe that apparently weren't right. This was one of them, but my question was less specific because notice he says in verse 29 he talks about the Levite not having an inheritance like the rest, but then he says, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. In other words, this is what will result from you being generous and sharing with the Levites. God will bless you. So as I saw it, what I noticed is the principle is, and this is much broader than what Joe said. What Joe said was absolutely correct. But it seems like God's saying, if you give to the poor, I will bless you. And the Levites weren't necessarily poor in the way that we think of it, but they, like the text says, they didn't have a regular inheritance like the other tribes did. They had, the Lord was their inheritance.
And for those that haven't read the text, the reason everyone's going to poor here is because this isn't exclusively for the Levites, for the alien, the orphan, and the widow.
True, that's true. Yes,
so
that's true.
This isn't just about the Levite. It's about those whose needs aren't being met for defined reasons.
Now, and you would think this is like counterintuitive to the worldly person, because the worldling will say, well, if I give, then I'll have less because I'm giving something away, and that makes me have less. God's saying, no, if you give, I will make sure that you get more in return. Now, that's not the primary reason why you should give, but God's just saying, if you give to the poor, I'm gonna bless you, and I'm gonna make sure that you're rewarded for that. So that's just those were my thoughts.
Yeah, so that's the principle you were hitting on there was that God, the Lord your God expects of his people that they care for those in need, and as they lovingly do that, God will care for their needs.
Yes.
Yay that. So that's how I would define the principle, or how I would express the principle.
We had a previous discussion on, sorry about that, Micah. We had a previous discussion about God's provision for the poor in the land as we were going through, I think it was through Leviticus. And, like they weren't supposed to, beat the boughs of their olive trees more than once. They're supposed to leave the gleaning. The fallen fruit belongs to, to the poor, the widow. So this seems to be in addition. This seems to be something that now they are, because we talked about in our previous discussion, the responsibility was on the poor for, if you want to come and glean the edges of my field or something, you can do that, but I'm not going to do it for you. I'm not going to do it and bring it to you. Or if I'm the poor one, right, I have to actually get up and come and do this. You're not going to chase me off. You'll allow me to do it, but you're not going to provide. This now is bringing it for that purpose. And so this seems to be an additional caveat to that, which again, I had just read over, so I appreciated it. But Mike, sorry, we had some lag and we both started at the same time, so my apologies.
No, it's okay. I guess I had sort of a follow-up application question. Do you guys think that there's any, obviously this is a special covenantal promise blessing to the Old Covenant nation of Israel, so I'm not trying to make the point that prosperity preachers make, but do you think that there's any application in terms of how modern Christians use their money? Like, is there a natural, even that goes beyond the covenantal situation there in the Old Covenant, where there's like a natural law principle here that if you're concerned with like what you're doing with your money in order to bless others, that's naturally going to lead to oftentimes to more blessing for you. I don't know. Like, it's just something that popped in my head.
Yeah,
so I wonder what you guys thought.
it's hard to talk about without sounding like a prosperity preacher, right?
Yeah.
I think. Well, I get what you're saying. Believe me, I am not a prosperity guy at all. I'm actually a poverty guy.
I have no prosperity.
You preach a poverty gospel.
I preach a poverty gospel. No, but there's one distinction here, and notice this is not talking about natural law at all. Notice the verse says, in order that the Lord your God may bless you. It's not saying there's some principle in the universe where if you give, like I've heard prosperity preachers say, like God has a built-in law in the universe where if you give, it's almost like karma. If you give, like it'll just somehow come back to you. Like there's some natural law that activates this. This is saying something different. This is saying God is the one who will reward you, not the law itself, but God.
Yeah.
And so I think that has to be the distinction that's made. This has nothing to do with the law.
Without reference to any specific verse, I think we should be watching for the expectation that God has given to His people, so that those gifts can be used for other people.
I think that's well stated. Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were done.
No,
I thought I was too.
Yeah. I mean, Micah, your follow-up question is a very interesting one. I think that Eric's point is a great one. God He isn't just saying, hey, you guys are recognizing the way that I made the world if you do this. There's this, just like you, as you sow in your fields, if you sow more abundantly, you'll reap more abundantly, that there's some spiritual principle or monetary principle. And so I think we should reject that. This is seemingly God saying, if you'll obey me, there is a covenantal blessing. Now, your question, though, if we go beyond that, is there a principle at work? I do think that there is. I think God is I think He's supercharging that principle. But there is enough, outside of Christian thought, outside of, the Judeo-Christian heritage, there are many people who recognize these principles, that living a life that is generous does tend to bring actually more resources to you. Like if you're going to be stingy and cheap and greedy, that is actually not the best way to get ahead. That it is a short-sighted thing. And of course the scriptures recognize this, but I think that there is a natural principle. So I maybe I would disagree with, Eric, what you were saying in that. I think there is a natural principle. But what God is saying here, the part that I agree with 100% of what Eric just said in particular, is that God is, I believe, in this covenant, supercharging that principle. And He's saying, don't you dare think that if you, are closed-handed towards the poor, that if you think that, you taking of the abundance that I give you and giving to them, that's somehow going to give you less. The more you honor this, the more you'll see. I'll send the rains. I will bring you produce. I will give you so much that you won't even know what to do with it. And kind of having that, if you were going to be a prosperity preacher, you should have been in the Old Covenant. Now, we'll see if those prosperity principles really do come into the New Covenant. I don't think that they will. Spoiler alert. But in this covenant, that was part of the it seems like, as we talked about the blessings, like if you'll obey me, if you'll do these things, you're going to be so blessed. And God was doing that for a purpose, to show the whole world that he was near and that he blessed them so severely. So I think he
blessed
was
them severely. That's
severe blessing.
Severe blessing.
So severe. All right, that was a poor word choice. Forgive me.
No, I like it.
Abundantly.
Abundantly, but
Severe
yeah,
blessing.
this blessing was intense, and they were going to lose it if they, they could still probably have some prosperity, right? I mean, if they work their fields and they don't give to the poor, they'll probably still have some. But if they were being generous and honoring this, God was going to supercharge that process. That's how I read it. But I have a follow-up question to this, and it's the verses right before the ones that Eric was having us look at. I'd seen this part before, and it just never really registered for whatever reason. But they were to set aside the tithe, but then they were supposed to seemingly enjoy it themselves. That's why it seems like this third year is for the Levite and the alien, the orphan, and the widow. But were the other 2 years for themselves? Like they were not for themselves, but for worship? Like they were to kind of set this aside, and then they were supposed to spend it on whatever their heart desires. They would go to the place that the Lord appointed, and they were supposed to, part of these feasts maybe during the appointed times, that they're supposed to bring this, and this was supposed to be their provision for that. Like, was God showing them, if you set this apart, that's going to provide for you when you go and do the appointed times? Or is there something else going on here? Am I missing something? How do you guys read this additional provision that they were to set it aside, and then they were either supposed to bring it and consume it, or they could sell it, exchange it for money, and then bring it and rebuy the stuff that they needed when they got to where they were going to worship the Lord?
So I think you have to connect this back to chapter 12, where it's talking about the Lord's chosen place of worship. Verse 11, then to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall bring all that I command you, burnt offerings, sacrifices, your tithes and contribution that you present, and all your finest vow offerings that you vow before the Lord. And so basically, what they were supposed to do is bring these tithes to the appointed place of worship at the appointed time. And I think the stipulation here is if it's too much. Like, if you can't actually transfer all this to the appointed place at the appointed time, then you can now enjoy it as an act of worship in a similar way. Like, God's making a provision for the abundant blessing, in other words. That's how I read this. But it's still an act of worship. It's still like, I think they would have still eaten this stuff at the appointed place of worship. They would have still enjoyed much of this stuff at the appointed place of worship. He's just saying, if you can't bring it because it's too much, you can do it at a place that you appoint, essentially.
So I was also kind of confused about this too, because as I read this, I could see different interpretations. I thought, like it says in verse 24, if the distance is so great for you that you're not able to bring the tithe, since the place where the Lord your God chooses to set his name is too far away from you and the Lord your God blesses you, then you shall exchange it for money and bind the money in your hand and go to the place which the Lord your God chooses. Now, it seems to me like they still had to go to the designated place, but exchanging all of their tithe for coin would make that journey much easier. And so they didn't have to. So there's two ways to look at this, I guess. You could say, well, they didn't have to go, but they still had to, they could enjoy their stuff, enjoy their tithe at a certain place set aside for that purpose, or they still had to go to the place that the Lord had appointed. We all know where that place ends up being in the future. But does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I read it.
Okay.
And so I think about, not that a tenth
like they still
of my,
had to go. They still had to go either way.
Yeah, that's
right.
I think that's how I
the
read
way
verse
that
25.
Yeah.
Verse
So
25.
as I
okay.
read the entirety of this, it seems to me like if you take a tenth of what you produce every year, that's a lot, and that's probably more than you could realistically consume by yourself in the week that you'd be there presenting it. And so, seems like you're bringing in abundance anyway. And so this third year seems to be a unique presentation of that so that it's not for you, that it's for everyone else. But yet there would be an abundance. If everybody brought a tenth of what we had and we all gathered together, there should be an overflow, right? There should be no lack. And I assume that, if I remember correctly, the overflow in the first 2 years would be particularly for the priests, I think. I'm not, maybe I should have researched that more, but the overflow or the meat of it in that third year would be going to the priests, the aliens, the orphans, and the widows. Does that make sense? Or did anybody see a major
You're saying we
flaw?
read that already?
If we haven't,
I don't remember that, but I mean, it makes
Okay.
sense what you're saying. I don't remember that being explicit. Like I said, this is a detail that really stood
That's
out
the way
to
I
me for
understood
the-
it.
for the
Whether or
first
not
time.
it's right or we've read it or not, that's the way I've interpreted it.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, this is like I say, I haven't been overly interested in the Old Testament tithing system because, quite frankly, it's another part of the the Old Covenant that doesn't directly relate to us. And so this just nuance has previously escaped. But what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. I'm not sure that makes it right.
Yeah,
but
sure it doesn't make it right.
but it does make sense to me. So I appreciate your thoughts. I don't have any additional thoughts. I have previously noticed that this was supposed to be a joyful thing, and so of course, most of my conversations when I have with people about tithing, they're not asking about this; they're asking in a modern context. That's not a conversation that I'm wanting to have from here. But I see this being something that they did benefit from, that they were feasting in. They could spend it on, especially if there was too much and they had to exchange it for money, that they could spend it on whatever their heart desires. It even includes, wine and strong drink, which I think would be a challenge for an awful lot of people to really understand. Like, whoa, you can worship the Lord in this way. Like, how do we understand?
You're misinterpreting that.
With a
inclusions
glass
like
of
inclusions
fine
like
aged
that.
whiskey. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so that's an interesting point, right? Because some people say, and we've had part of this conversation before that nobody can drink the Nazirite vow. Well, it doesn't seem like it's forbidding everybody ever. That was a particular provision, but it is. I don't think a lot of people who view particularly the Old Testament as like this drudgery and this this horrible God. I'll use the phrase that I used earlier. It's all jumping through hoops. Part of this was God is saying, you set this aside so that you can celebrate. And this is supposed to be a worshipful thing. And I think, Greg, you made the point when we were talking about like the appointed times. These sounded like some pretty joyous festivals, and a lot of people didn't want to do them. But man, this was great. Enjoy the fruit of your labor. Come and worship the Lord and have this unity with everybody else that worship the Lord and celebrate his abundant provision. It seems like this is all tied to that as I read through this. And then there is going to be abundance. And then particularly in the third year, it's not just about you, but it's also about blessing others and making sure that they're provided for. And there are other parts of the law that seems like to make sure that they were provided for all along the way. But this is then an extravagant additional blessing for them to make sure that they have what they need.
That's
at
the way
least
I
as I
read
read it. As I read it this time, that's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah, with the gleaning, the gleaning of from the fields, and then we'll get into other kinds of giving that was involved in I think in the next chapter.
So I just want to add something. I think I glossed over major portions of that. So I
Our
agree with you guys.
conversation or
I
the
think,
text?
No, the text in my original comments. So yeah, I agree with you guys. For some reason, my mind was not putting together the money, exchanging it for money, and taking it to the same place. I think I misunderstood that. So I wanted to add that. I think I was wrong. So because this is a conversation about changing your mind. So we're supposed to be willing to change our minds, right? So I was wrong.
I've changed my mind too. You're wrong.
That's very generous of you, Greg. Yeah.
I'm a generous guy.
Okay, well, maybe we can move into Deuteronomy chapter 15. Here we read about the Sabbatic year, and we've read about similar things in other verses. For example, we read about the year of Jubilee in Leviticus chapter 25. So my question is, how is the Sabbatic year different from the year of Jubilee back in Leviticus 25?
Well, it's the year of Jubilee is just at the end of 7 sabbatic years, right? Like that's my understanding of it. Like
50th
you have,
year, yeah.
it's 50th year. It's after the series, the whole series of sevens. So the sabbatic year would be would be every 7. Am I understanding that the way that you guys do?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
I think the question is maybe, though, if you're like remitting debts in the 7th year and if you did that on the 49th year, what would make the 50th year like? Is there something additional? At least that's how I was understanding your question. So,
Yeah, there's forgiveness in both of them.
I'm not sure that so it seems to me that the Jubilee includes a returning of people's property, like their land and stuff, which I'm not sure that the Sabbatic year also did that. Maybe it did. But like, if we were under this covenant, I might accrue a debt, and maybe I've sold my land or something like that previously. Maybe my debt is forgiven, but I'm not sure that I would get the land back on a Sabbatic year. But the Jubilee, then the land would come back to my family or to my inheritance or something like that. So the Jubilee seems to be an exaggerated
reset,
or
yeah.
a bigger reset than the Sabbatic year. But yeah, Mike, I read it exactly as you do. Each set of 7 years, the 7th year is a Sabbatic year, which would include the things that we're reading about here. And then after 7 cycles of this, there is a 50th year, which is the Jubilee year, which is then like an exclamation point kind of thing. And I think it's more intensified, that there are some things that seemingly would revert in the Jubilee that wouldn't have in the Sabbatic year. It goes even further. At least that's how I read it.
I've heard it compared to like the sabbatic year is a pronounced rest, and then the Jubilee is like total restoration.
Interesting.
That's one of the commentaries that I read explained it that way. But
that sounds. I've never thought about that. That sounds initially right. I mean, that's a much more concise way of saying what I was just trying to reach for. So,
Yeah,
Greg, any thoughts?
No, I think I like Joe's more detailed explanation than the rest and restoration, but I get what they're driving at, and so I have nothing to add.
Just briefly, nothing contradictory, but in the sabbatic year, it occurs every 7 years. The year of Jubilee occurs every 50, like we already talked about. In the sabbatic year, the land is to lay fallow, no planting or harvesting. And then in the year of Jubilee, all the land all the land that has been sold returns to its original owner, like Joe, I think, had mentioned that. Debts are forgiven and indentured servants are released in the sabbatic year. Year of Jubilee, slaves and indentured servants are freed. So it seems like there's similarities, but there's clear differences too. And I just wanted to point those out because it does seem like these chapters can sometimes seem redundant, but if you look closely, you'll find that there are differences, and the differences actually make a lot of sense. All right, we were talking about the poor earlier, and we returned to that topic in chapter 15. And so some might read this, and they might think that the chapter contradicts itself, because verse 4 says, "There will be no poor among you," but then in verse 11 it says, "The poor will never cease to be in the land." So do these statements contradict each other? Why or why not? What do you guys think?
No, they don't contradict each other. I think that they're talking about different things. If you do this, then the poor will be provided for, so they won't be poor in one sense, but they still do need this provision. So they are poor. You'll always have the poor, and so that's why you always need to do these things. And so if there was nobody to give the 30-year tithe to, for example, then what would you do with it? So you give it to them. There are poor, but then they're not poor because they're provided for, right? So you kind of see these things working together in that regard. Does this fix the problem of poverty so that nobody needs this provision anymore? It doesn't. That's why you will always do this. You'll always have the poor among you. But if you do this, the poor among you won't be like the poor in other places that are completely unprovided for. We have a problem of poverty in our own land, for example, which this covenant provided a solution to that the poor would have provision, even though they wouldn't cease to exist. Their poverty would be mitigated, I guess, is the way I see it.
So you'd say that verse 4 is the ideal end result of the kind of generosity that he's commanding.
Yes, but also I would go a little beyond that to say that if the generosity ceased, they would immediately be poor again in the regard that they don't have, for whatever reason, they're not, a widow doesn't have somebody providing for her. So if you're not providing for this, then she will immediately she is poor. But this ideal provision makes it so that she who has no husband to provide, or the orphans have no parents to provide, that the system itself provides for them what is lacking in there. So yeah, the ideal, but it doesn't. I would think maybe the ideal is no parents ever die. No, no husband. Nobody's ever left as a widow. Everybody always has their own, means of production or something like that. It's not describing that type of ideal, I guess, would be a clarification.
I guess, in right or wrong, the way I read this text is, here is God setting up the expectation that there will be no one destitute among you.
Sure.
If you're doing this, no one is going to be completely without means. But there are always going to be people who need from you, and it's your responsibility to take care of them. So therefore, it's your responsibility to not allow them to be destitute.
Yeah,
is the way I would correlate those two texts without the need to make them contradictory.
I totally agree. There would never be a poor person in the land that was not provided for. That's the way you guys said. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, I think I'm right too. So we're good.
Cool. Well, that's two of us.
I gotta find a way to disagree. Just to,
that's fine. Yeah,
we'll give you a minute if you need that.
let me think something up real quick.
Take some time.
Oh.
Well, how about we jump into chapter 16 of Deuteronomy? And I had one question. The chapter includes instructions regarding the feasts of Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and also booths. We've already read about these we've already read about these feasts in previous chapters, but is there any additional information in this chapter that we don't find in the earlier chapters on this same subject?
I'm not an expert in these things. We've talked about these festivals before. The only thing that seems different to me is the way that they're grouped together. And so I think that we need to read Exodus 23 and Deuteronomy 16 together to get an understanding of what this schedule looks like. And when we were talking about the appointed times in Leviticus, they're slightly different names, but they're talking about the same groupings. And then those various groupings have various appointed times together in them, which I think were all celebrated together. And so, these three sections, what we read in Leviticus, here in Deuteronomy 16, what we read in Exodus 23, the Leviticus section is probably the most detailed. Exodus is pretty brief. Here now in Deuteronomy, we're getting another grouping, but it's the same groups. So again, is that different? I don't think so, but I do think we need to read all of them together, as you've said before. Like these things are meant to be read together, and so it's only by reading them together that you get the full picture of what this festival schedule looked like. But I have nothing beyond that.
So I have a question that just jumped into my head. I didn't have a whole lot to say before this, so you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here. Is the emphasis on the place that the Lord your God will choose to make His name dwell there? Is that in the other passages or no?
I don't recall that being.
Maybe that's not what you were getting at, Eric. But I didn't notice that when I was studying the passage. That's literally just a spur of the moment question. But
well, I take that back. That is one of the things. It's not the only thing, but that is one of the things. In Leviticus, the importance of worshiping at a particular location, I don't think is really emphasized. At least not as much as it is.
Exodus 23:17 says, 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord God, but it doesn't say where. So it does seem like that is I think that sounds like a fair observation that now it's you make this appearance in the place that He's going to choose.
Somewhere in particular,
Yeah.
So, Eric, I wasn't trying to cut you off. I'm sorry. I thought you were.
No, that's perfectly fine. No, and I don't know that that's emphasized so much in Leviticus 23 either. There's definitely and it kind of makes sense too, because like if Israel at this point is just about to enter the land, then they need to be thinking about, okay, where are these things going to take place? We're just about to enter the land, so we need this needs to be more emphasized because it's about to be a reality for us. I also noticed that I had help noticing this, but it seems like in Deuteronomy 16 there's more of an emphasis on the need to rejoice during the festivals. I read Leviticus 23, and there's not anything explicitly stated about making sure that you're rejoicing during the festivals. In Deuteronomy 16, there is a emphasis on make sure that you are rejoicing before the Lord. Make sure that you that you have joy in your hearts, that you're celebrating before the Lord. And I think that's an important detail. Not that it's not implied. Of course, it's implied in Leviticus 23 and in Exodus also. But here, it's like explicitly stated. You need to be rejoicing before the Lord your God, celebrating in his presence, and being thankful for all the blessings that he's given you. And again, now that they're just about to enter the land, it seems very appropriate to mention these kinds of details right now.
The New American Standard says in Leviticus 23:41 that they would celebrate, but I'm not sure. That might just be a...
but also in
that might just
chapter
be
16, verse 3, or 16:13, the note on celebrate is perform.
I don't know that it means celebrate in the way that, observe or keep. So that's an interesting, the location itself, as well as the disposition of the participants, do seem to be new additions to that this should be a particular place and a rejoicing in that place. And this translation of celebrate, you shall celebrate it in 23, is probably a little bit more mechanistic than what we would think of when we think about. It's more like maybe celebrating a coworker's birthday or something like that. You have to do this. It's time for the cake in the break room or something like that. You must do it.
One of the commentators that I was reading actually sees this as a thread that is unique to Deuteronomy. So he makes the point that Eric was pointing out. He says that the specific aspect of rejoicing before the Lord is something that is infused into these texts in Deuteronomy that isn't as present elsewhere. So he sees it in a similar way. He sees it specifically even with regard to the tithes. When they come together to eat the tithe, that's supposed to be a meal of rejoicing as well. So, you're not alone in that observation, in other words, Eric.
I think I missed it probably because it's so baked in the cake at this point, right? Like this isn't the first time any of us are approaching the text. And so, I have a little more holistic view. So I guess I kind of always seen this as a time to get together and, be thankful and rejoice and, not unrestrained, of course, but,
that's actually a good point. That's a good point because I think the context, is probably why they have the word rejoice, because it's in the context of it's a festival. It's something, and actually in Deuteronomy 16:15, I'm not sure what the Hebrew is here, but it says 7 days you shall celebrate a feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses. And here's why you should do it, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful. So the word perform there, it seems like it's not quite grasping the full meaning, because he's saying the reason you should perform this, the reason why you should behave this way is because the Lord your God is just going to bless you abundantly. And then he goes on to talk about being altogether joyful. So
the joyful is an addition here. The celebrate is the same word, but this idea of being altogether joyful or making merry is I think a little bit more unique to this. Although, no, it does appear in Leviticus 23, Leviticus 23:40, to rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days in a year. So it is there. But it does seem, I think the emphasis anyway is, it does come through a little bit clearer here in Deuteronomy 16. It's repeated a few times. So Deuteronomy 16:11, rejoice before the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 16:14, you shall rejoice. 16:15, which you just read. So it's repeated 3 times. So definitely the repetition is there, but that rejoice word does appear, same word in Leviticus 23:40. So they are to celebrate it or perform it. They are to do it with rejoicing. This isn't a new concept, but it is does seem to be emphasized here. I think it's a fair observation anyway. So I didn't
I'm
make
still
it,
right.
but
I just haven't figured out how.
but as I hear you
Neither
say
have
it,
we.
it sounds right to me. Interesting.
Okay. Well, that's all I had.
Well, anybody else with any other observations or questions before we close the book on Deuteronomy 14, 15, and 16? Doesn't look like it.
No.
Well, once again, gentlemen, as always, I appreciate your perspective. If you're still watching this, you've heard what we think. What do you think? We'd love to hear your comments below. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Anything else from these chapters that you find particularly interesting that we didn't discuss? Go ahead and drop us a comment below. We'd love to read those. And until we see you again, friends, get equipped, obey your king, and glorify your God.
It's a beautiful ditch.